Hi, I'm Sarah Ellis.
And I'm Helen Tupper.
And you're listening to the Squiggly Careers podcast. Each week we talk about a different topic to do with work and discuss practical ideas and actions to help you find your way through our increasingly squiggly world of work. And today we're going to be talking about beginner's mindset. We're going to start with what it is, why it matters, and then we're going to share 5 ideas for action on how you can rediscover, restart, reboot, whichever works for you, your beginner's mindset. So let's start a little bit with defining beginner's mindset. And we also thought it might be helpful to talk about how we think beginner's mindset is connected to, but different to growth mindset. And before we even started this podcast, Helen and I had a 15-minute chat on that. So we'll try and keep it short. We'll try and précis what we've started to think about that. But let's start with beginner's mindset and just how we think of beginner's mindset. So our short, and I think it's quite a work in progress definition at the moment that we think about, is a beginner's mindset is your ability to see things as if you're starting from scratch. And then let me give you some more official definitions to kind of work with and see whether you, if you don't like that one, perhaps one of these will work a bit better for you. An interesting report that Deloitte did actually about CEOs needing to have a beginner's mindset. They say, we define beginner's mindset as an inclination to periodically question and reassess deeply held theories, archetypes and conventions to devise new and fundamentally innovative solutions. It's very Deloitte, isn't it?
It's very Deloitte.
It's very... Oh dear. Sometimes the language of like archetypes and conventions makes it sound very serious.
Starting from scratch is and I say, yep,
definitely. Be able to see things as if you're starting from scratch. And then a lot of the work on beginner's mindset, or the thinking, I suppose, on beginner's mindset comes from mindfulness or yoga originally. And probably the most famous quote on beginner's mindset comes from Shunryu Suzuki, who was a Zen monk, teacher and author. And he says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's, there are few. And actually, if you read any of the resources or the links to different articles that we're going to share today, you'll see that quote pops up pretty much in every reference to beginner's mind. This idea of opening up lots of possibilities, being able to see things, I think, from kind of different perspectives. And we talked about how is this different to growth mindset? And, we're still definitely exploring this ourselves together. But the conclusion we got to for now was growth mindset is all about active improvement. So it's all about continually improving, getting better, being a work in progress. And we've done loads of podcasts on growth mindset that you can listen to. I think beginner's mindset is slightly different because I think beginner's mindset is this openness to see things in a different way, to start from a different point of view, to almost like not start from kind of where you are today. And you probably need a beginner's mindset, I suspect, to develop a growth mindset. I don't know whether one has to kind of always come before the other, but I think perhaps there is this difference between active improvement versus openness to see things in a different way.
And it's worth us picking up a little bit on the expert word that Sarah mentioned in that quote. We are not anti-expert. So what we're not saying is that you've always got to be a beginner and therefore you should never go and pursue expertise in something that you are passionate about. It's not about that at all. Sarah and I talk about, we want to become career experts and know and learn as much as we can. But the point is there's not really a full stop to that statement. We will always be learning. We will always be improving. So it's absolutely fine to be an expert in the thing that you are really passionate about. But the point is that you don't see expertise as something that will almost ever stop, that learning ever stops. Actually, if you ever do that, if you ever kind of go, I'm an expert, I don't need to learn anymore because I have got as much knowledge as I could have about this subject, that's actually where expertise can work against you. There's a term called earned dogmatism, which I find quite a funny term, but psychologists have this term earned dogmatism, and it's basically where people see themselves as an expert and then they stop learning and then they become very closed-minded. So, we're talking about beginners' minds being open-minded. When you see yourself as the expert and you stop learning, you become very closed-minded, and that becomes quite damaging for you in your career because obviously everything's changing all around us. The technology's changing our jobs. The pace of change in our organisations is changing how we do them, who we do them with. Even if you stay in the same subject, your subject doesn't stay still. And that's why we need to keep investing in our learning. And I appreciate this is already quite a quote-heavy podcast so far, but Sarah and I love the futurist called Alvin Toffler, who I'm sure we've mentioned before on the podcast, but we love a quote that he has about the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn and relearn. And in squiggly careers where there's, movement and change, our ability to keep open-minded, to stay open to learning, to be beginners is so important to our career success. And I saw a really interesting study about this kind of openness and this beginner's mindset. I
got really distracted by this, by the way.
Did you?
Yeah.
So there's a study that shows how our beginner's mindset actually reduces as we get older. So this is why we need to focus on this, everybody. So there's a test that psychologists do to assess your beginner's mindset. And it involves with asking people 2 questions. How many uses can you think of for a shoe? And then the other question is, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? And most people, when you ask that question to them, most people can think of like 10 to 15 different uses. Some people can get to as many as 200 different uses for the shoe and the paperclip. And psychologists say it's those people that get to like the 200 that have a genius level of what's called divergent thinking, this openness, this ability to see things from different perspectives and generate new ideas. And the really interesting thing with the difference between the people that come up with 10 to 15 ideas and the people that get to 200 is how it plays out with different age groups. So 98% of 5-year-olds, that's like my little boy Henry, have genius levels of divergent thinking, i.e. they can come up with up to 200 different random ideas for how you use the shoe and the paperclip. So 98% of 5-year-olds, 32% of 10-year-olds, so starts to reduce considerably, 10% of 15-year-olds get to that genius level of divergent thinking, and only 2% of adults. So it goes from 98% at 5 years old, 98% get to 200 ideas, and only 2% of adults. I think it's quite shocking. There's a poet who says that part of the reason for this is that children live the questions and adults assume the answers. And what we want to help you to do today is, live the questions a bit more.
And I think the good news for all of us is that having a beginner's mindset is really learnable. Actually, I think it is really hard. I'm going to talk about my own experience of this as part of the actions that we're going to go through. I think it's hard and I think it's really uncomfortable, but it is something we can get better at. So what we're going to do now is talk about 5 ideas for action that we've had through the things that we've read so far around how you can make, I think, beginner's mindset more part of your everyday. And you might have more ideas. We'd love to hear from you. If you have, get in touch with us on Instagram, share different thoughts that you've got. But these are 5 things that we recognise have helped us and that also have come up through the different kind of research that we've read. So our first idea for action is spotting when your expert mind is holding you back, where you're shortcutting to those, assuming the answers that we talked about in a way where almost before somebody has perhaps finished their sentence or finished their presentation, you've already gone into, I always think it as default mode, where you're thinking, oh, well, I know this, I know the answer to this, I know how to solve this, I know how this works. And I think different things trigger that almost expert mind where it's being unhelpful for us, where it's kind of hindering us for different people. So Helen, what's your example of when do you reckon you go into kind of that unhelpful expert mind?
Yeah, the basically? Unhelpful expert mind. So I think it's technology, and it's because I really like technology and I play with it quite a lot, and we use it a lot in our business as well. And it sounds like this is awful, and I don't articulate it like this, but in my head, it sounds like move on, I know that. That's the narrative, which sounds horrendous, but I'll give a real example last week, and I had to really stop myself, and I'm so glad I did. I had to shut down the unhelpful expert. I was doing a session with a client, and it was a tech test for the new bit of software we were going to use to deliver one of our amazing if sessions. They'd brought their tech person on to help me with it, and I thought, I've used this before, we can move on really quickly, let's just talk about the people and their needs. And I was honestly going, yeah, fine. And I stopped myself because I thought, well, A, that's quite rude. I think that was my primary thing. I was like, you can't interrupt somebody. That's quite rude. But then I also thought, it's likely that they might know something that I don't. So I'm just going to pause and just go through it. And then I did learn. They taught me some new things that I didn't know that I could do with that particular software. And if I had let the unhelpful expert come on, I would have said, yeah, don't worry, I've got this. Let's move on to the agenda of the session or what's coming next. But because I think that there was something that went on in my brain last week that I was like, oh, I can't say that now. And I just paused and kept listening and stayed with the conversation and open to what that person was trying to helpfully teach me about. That meant that ultimately I learned more, and it will make the sessions that we deliver better as a result of it.
I think that phrase, unhelpful expert, is a good one to remember. I think mine is really different to yours. I think mine, and you'll probably recognise it, but I think mine is because I visualise things. Often I have an idea in mind of what something might look like. I think in my head, I imagine, like, let's say we're doing a new creative campaign for our Instagram, or if we're launching something new. I think about things a lot, so therefore I visualise them. I know where I think something should be going. And then if someone presents something back to me that is very different to that, I find it really hard then, because I sort of go, oh no, well, that's not right. That's not what it looks like. That's not the right way. And I think that's where I become an unhelpful expert, almost where it's one of those things. I do wonder whether sometimes this might be an example of where your strengths can work against you. It's because you've got a strength in that area. Like, that's a strength of mine. Like, ideas and being able to visualize things is useful and it's helpful for our business. But that unhelpful expert behaviors, when those actions means that you shut people down, that you can't see other perspectives, that you're not open to other possibilities, then it kind of gets in your way. So I think it's a really interesting thing, I think, to think about for yourself. When are you most likely to be an unhelpful expert? Like, what are the triggers? What are the examples? And then how do you respond? What are your kind of reactions? And then I think you'll be able to think about some of the things we're going to go on to talk about and think, oh, I can try to behave exactly as Helen just gave that example. I can try to respond in a new way or in a different way.
So our second tip, an idea for action, is all about staying present. So if you think, you know what, I consciously want to operate with more of a beginner's mindset, perhaps in those modes where maybe the unhelpful expert is particularly triggered. So for me, maybe it's, you know, when technology is present, or when there's short of time, for example, there are particular triggers for me for the unhelpful expert. The importance of staying present really, really will help you. It goes back to that quote that Sarah said about when you've got the mind of a beginner, you're endeavouring to look at things as if it's for the first time, free from influence of the past or speculation about the future. So the way that we free ourselves from the influence of the past and the speculation about the future is we stay present in the moment, really open to, well, what's going on right now? What can I learn from the people that are with me right now? How can I learn more about their perspectives, rather than feeling like you have to make, you know, assumptions about where this might go in the future or bring in your expertise from the past. And one of the things that I read around this that I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, I wonder how that plays out, is a lot of us will apply labels to ourselves and to other people that can actually affect our ability to stay open. For example, if I say, I've talked about the I am an expert label, but you might say is, well, I am the accountant in this situation. I'm the person that brings all the financial insight, or I am the manager. So I am the person who needs to make the ultimate decision. When we have these like labels that we apply to ourselves and other people's, we create those archetypes in our mind, which can basically introduce a fixed mindset. So if I go, I am the manager, that archetype might be, I need to lead this conversation, I need to make the decisions. And by doing that, we already start to put a bit of a fixed mindset around it. We don't necessarily make it more open to someone else to make the decisions. We don't necessarily make it more open to someone else leading the conversation. And so what the important thing is if you're having a discussion about something and you very consciously want to stay open, as I said, you know, you work out what those discussions are when this feels like a really important approach for you. Drop the labels about yourself, drop the labels about other people, and just get curious and stay open. What is it that I can learn from these people? How can I hear more about their perspective? And how can I make sure that everybody's open to what they can bring? And I'm not trying to limit anybody by what label I'm applying to them.
And our third idea for action is something that you can do individually, or actually, I think this is a really fun thing. I say fun. I think we would find this fun. A fun thing to do as a team, or perhaps if you're a smaller company, you could even do together as an organisation, which is about focusing on questions rather than answers and possibilities rather than problems. So this is about really playing with ways to encourage divergent thinking. So when you're not a beginner, I think you have to almost like inject a way of thinking that opens up your perspective to feel more like a beginner again. And that doesn't just happen. You probably have to ask yourself some of these questions to help you to start to really think this through. So these sorts of questions often sound like, how might we, how could I, what would happen if, all those kind of very open questions that just kind of get you to have some fun with thinking about things in a different way. So, you might look at a competitor and say, how might a competitor approach this? Or you might go even further and say, how would somebody starting up in our industry for the first time approach this? Or perhaps how would somebody in a different country, a different geography approach this? You can play around with things like if you'd got no budget, if you'd got unlimited budget, that's always quite a fun thing to do. You can play around with time if you had to do it really quickly, or if you could only do one thing, kind of what would you do? So almost creating, I think the time, this is often something I think we deprioritise. We don't create the time and space to do this because I suspect a lot of the time this feels like nice to have thinking. This feels like, oh, yeah, I can see how this might be useful, but we never prioritise doing this because there's always something more kind of urgent and important on our to-do lists. But this is how we get used to and kind of practice having that beginner's mindset. This is how we open up those possibilities that we talked about. And I think if you're facilitating these kind of conversations, and I think they do need a bit of planning and facilitation to be done really well, really think about who speaks in which order. So if you're the leader of that team, or if you're perhaps the facilitator of that team, maybe speaking last, because that really forces you to listen. I'm halfway through at the moment. I'm reading a really good book called You're Not Listening, What You're Missing and Why It Matters by Kate Murphy. And so far, she hasn't explicitly said anything about kind of beginner's mindset. That's kind of not why I've made the link. But what she has talked a lot about is just the importance of kind of listening as a skill. And as we're talking about beginner's mindset, I feel like one of the skills probably that underpins your ability to be able to have a beginner's mindset is probably being able to listen really well and in a really active way, because she talks about being really present, asking brilliant questions. And I go, oh, there's a lot of similarities here. So perhaps once I finished it, I'll try and connect the dots.
I agree. And I think also that's probably another reason why beginner's mindset is different to growth mindset, because I think I wouldn't put listening as one of my underpinning skills necessarily for growth mindset, but I would for beginner's mindset. Also, Sarah, I think this is something that you are really good at, the questions, not the answers, but very particularly when you do it. So there'll be some times when Sarah and I will just feel like a bit stuck on something. I mean, and it could be something like, I don't know, we're looking at redesigning our website, or we are stuck on just some phrasing for a chapter of our book, something like that. And Sarah will say, well, okay, well, what if we looked at it from a completely different perspective? And suddenly we'll bring in one of these types of questions right at the moment when we're stuck in it. So I don't always think that this is about, well, let's have just a really open thinking session where we ask these questions from the start. That might be fun. And, it
actually really appeals to me.
Yeah, I would like to do that too. But some, luxury of time, all those kind of things. It's not always possible to have those really free thinking 1 hour sessions with everybody. But those sorts of questions that Sarah talked through, used at those points when people are stuck, it can really open up a conversation. You do that very well, Sarah. Often helps me to get unstuck. So our fourth idea for action is to spend time in other people's worlds, because when we're in our own world, where we're working in the way that works for us and we're consuming the information that we like and that maybe reinforces sometimes what we already know, that can sometimes make those boundaries very firm. And when we get out of our little bubble and spend time in other people's worlds, it helps us to see their perspectives, to understand their experiences, and it just makes us more open. And I was thinking actually about a lot of us have been working in our own homes for the past sort of 9 months now. And I was thinking, well, if one of the things that can help people with a beginner's mindset is spending time in other people's worlds, how much harder is that now when so much of our time is spent like on our own at home physically, even though you're connected to people virtually? And I think it maybe is a bit harder because some of the informal conversations that we might have had that might have given us some of that perspective aren't so easy now. if your days are anything like ours, there are a lot of meetings, and I think there's a risk sometimes that work has become quite transactional. So I would suggest just reaching out to people to understand, well, what's your experience of this situation? How are you feeling about this? What ideas have you got about how we could approach it? What does your experience help you to understand about this? Just those spending time learning with and from other people so that you are open to their ideas and perspectives, and that you're not just thinking the only thing I'm supposed to do in this situation is bring my ideas and my perspectives. Something that can be really valuable in conversations is to ask curious questions, to invite other people to share those too, so that you spend as much time in their world as you do your own, can really help you to stay with a beginner's mindset.
I've actually said yes to doing something, particularly because of this, where somebody said to me they are doing some research and insight into how people are feeling who are at the very start of their careers. So whether they are apprentices, kind of straight out of school, or just kind of leaving university or college and kind of starting work right now. And I thought, I don't know that many people in kind of that life stage. And often when we're working with companies, we work with very kind of diverse groups of people. So you don't spend very much kind of one-to-one time really understanding what it must be like to start work right now. I almost can't contemplate it, because I do feel like some of, the connections and the confidence and things that I have is partly because of all the experiences you've had so far. And so much of that was built in a kind of more face-to-face way. And so I'm like fascinated and really intrigued to kind of go, I've got almost no assumptions that I'm starting with. I sort of don't know whether, does it feel fine? Because people are, I imagine that generation are very comfortable with technology, but is that a right assumption or not? Or is it mixed, just like it would be for lots of other generations? Do people feel okay about building all the relationships online or not? I don't know. But actually the reason, there are loads of things you can say yes or no to, lots of opportunities that kind of come your way all the time. And that was one where I just thought, I almost feel like I would never get the opportunity otherwise to spend time in those people's worlds. And it gives me a kind of direct chance to just, and it's all about kind of hearing, and it's very much about listening and insight. So I think that'll be fascinating. So I'm starting that tomorrow. So our final idea for action is to genuinely be a beginner, which might sound really obvious, but I think doing something from scratch, actually practicing kind of the art of being a beginner again, is probably a really good way to give you some insight into what that feels like. It reminds you how hard it is, how uncomfortable it is. And the reason I think I was particularly interested in this topic is I did this over the past 6 or 7 weeks. So I joined a drawing course with a company called Scriberia for 6 weeks, every Friday for 2 hours. And it was with a group of about 15 other people. And I was a real beginner there. I think it's also fair to say, I've probably mentioned it before, I was more of a beginner than everybody else on that course, which didn't make it the wrong course for me. It just meant that I was kind of starting from a lower base. Where we started to do some drawings and share them on screen, I was like, oh, okay, these people are all really talented. I can't even draw a horse. Actually, horses are really hard to draw, but anyway. And so I found that process actually really interesting, because I think firstly it reminded me it had been a long time since I had been a kind of true beginner, because we spend a lot of time in careers and career development kind of trying to become very intentionally more expert, whereas this was really going, okay, well, I don't even know how to draw a face. I don't even know where's the right place to put the eyes on that face. And so everything feels hard. It's all a lot of kind of intentional effort. And actually, as the weeks went on, I think I got more and more comfortable with being uncomfortable with that. I've got quite tense and quite anxious in that kind of first week. And then I got more used to showing my work, getting through those feelings and some of those emotions that are harder to grapple with. I was like, oh, I was a bit embarrassed, or oh, I'm not very good at this. And lots of that, whether it's imposter syndrome, or you can start to kind of feel quite negative. But then actually I started probably about halfway through, I think I had a bit of a tipping point of almost accepting my beginnerness, which I think is actually really important. And then actually trying to just embrace it and enjoy the process of being a beginner. And actually, since the course ended, I really miss it. I really miss those 2 hours of, it was quite a freeing way to learn, and a very different way to learn. I think it uses your brain in a very different way. I sort of actually wanted it to keep going, which I found really interesting, because even at the start I was like, I'm not sure this is the right thing for me to be doing with my time right now. I'm finding this really hard. And it doesn't need to be drawing, obviously, it can be anything. But I think asking yourself that question, when did I last learned something where I'd got no prior knowledge, what would you be really interested? Like, pick something that you'd be really interested to be a beginner in. Find a way of learning that. It doesn't have to be a course. It could clearly be you can do it by yourself. You could do a Skillshare course. You can follow some stuff on YouTube. But just going through that process, I think, gives us confidence that you can be a beginner. And I think you just learn some kind of skills and some coping mechanisms that then you can also apply into those areas of your life where you are more expert and you want to inject that beginnerness.
I can see a chart in my mind of like the beginner's journey where you start off going, oh, I'm going to really enjoy this. And you're like, well, I'm really happy. And then you're like, I'm really awful at this. And then you kind of go lower and lower. And now I'm really embarrassed. And do I stop? Do I stop learning right now? And then you kind of go through it and you get to where you are now, which is like, I want more. Like, there's probably some kind of funny illustration of that journey that you've been on. So let's just summarize those 5 ideas for action then for how to rediscover your beginner's mindset. So idea for action number 1 was about spot your expert, your unhelpful expert. Idea number 2 was about staying present and dropping the labels. Idea for action 3 was about focusing on questions and not answers. Idea for action 4 was spending time in other people's worlds. And number 5 was do something for scratch. So we hope you found that useful and it gives you some different things to work on in the weeks ahead. And there is no Ask the Expert this week, so we finished that series now. Do catch up on them if you've missed any of them. We are going to put a bit of a playlist on Instagram of all the episodes from series 1 and series 2. So if you have missed out on any of them, then you'll be able to see them there. So go and have a look there. And if you would like a third series of Ask the Expert, then let us know. You can either message us at AmazingIf on Instagram or get in touch with us over email, Helen and Sarah at squigglycareers.com. Let us know what topics you think we might have missed in the series we've done so far and any experts that you would particularly love to hear from. But yeah, if you enjoyed this one, if you've enjoyed our previous episodes, please do rate, review and subscribe to Squiggly Careers. It helps us stay in touch with you, but it also helps us show up for other people that might benefit from learning about the podcast. So that is it from this week. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll both speak to you very soon. Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye for now.